A story of ambition, royal intrigue, and imprisonment in the Tower of London.
And if we were to put that to an ordinary jury, was Richard guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of killing his nephews in the Tower of London?
History is written by the victors, but DNA doesn't lie. For centuries, the fate of the princes in the Tower has been the ultimate historical whodunit. But the guessing game is over. By tracing an unbroken maternal line from the royal family to a modern-day descendant, scientists have managed to cross-reference the genetic markers of the remains found in 1674. The match is perfect, but the implications are terrifying. The test confirms the identity of the princess in the Tower narrative, but the twist lies in the timing. The science proves that the true villain wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was sitting on the throne, the genetic time machine. But to truly understand the weight of this discovery, we have to look inside the marble urn that hid the truth for centuries. The mystery of the Tower has always felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. For centuries, we've had the motive, we've had the opportunity, but we've never had the bodies, at least not officially. But here's the catch. In 1674, workmen demolishing a staircase in the Tower of London stumbled upon a wooden box containing two small skeletons. Everyone at the time assumed these were the lost princes, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York.
I said that it was job done, but actually it wasn't job done. Did Richard III murder the princes in the Tower?
They were swept up, placed in a marble urn designed by Christopher Wren, and interred in Westminster Abbey. And there they sat, untouched, unverified, a royal question mark buried in hallowed ground. For years, the Church of England and the Crown refused to open the urn. They called it a sacred space. But let's be real, they were afraid of what they might find, or what they wouldn't. But as science got better, the pressure grew. The game changed when researchers identified a living link, a direct all-female line descendant of Elizabeth Woodville, the mother of the princes. Her name is Elizabeth Roberts, an opera singer whose mitochondrial DNA is a perfect copy of the medieval queen's. This was the key. Mitochondrial DNA is the biological equivalent of a time machine. It gets passed down from mother to child almost unchanged. If the bones in the urn were truly the royal children, their DNA had to match hers. And get this, the results were not just a match, they were a mathematical certainty. The team targeted the petrous bone, a dense, rock-hard section of the skull behind the ear that preserves DNA like a biological vault. Despite 500 years of decay, handling by 17th century workmen, and the stifling atmosphere of the Abbey, the sequence was clear.
But I think the princes weren't murdered. I think they actually survived.
The bones in the urn are not random medieval paupers. They are, without a shadow of a doubt, the children of Elizabeth Woodville. This is the wow factor historians have been waiting for. It instantly validates the 1674 discovery. But more importantly, it creates a solid baseline for the crime. We now have the who, we know the victims. But the DNA analysis didn't stop at identification. The scientists pushed further, using radiocarbon dating to pinpoint the time of their demise. And this is where the story takes a dark, sharp turn. The carbon dating narrowed the window of their end to a specific time frame, late 1483 to early 1484. This date is crucial. It's the linchpin that holds the entire mystery together. If they passed away in 1483, it instantly rules out the later suspects. It destroys the theories that they were spirited away to live secret lives in Europe. The science confirms they perished while still boys, while still prisoners in the Tower. The DNA confirms the identity, and the carbon dating confirms the timeline. The chaos of 1483. However, knowing when they passed away is only half the battle. To find the culprit, we have to step back into the chaos that put them there. To understand the DNA results, you have to understand the mess of 1483. And that's putting it lightly. England was a powder keg. The country was just recovering from the Wars of the Roses, a brutal, decades-long family feud between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. By the 1480s, the Yorkists had won. King Edward IV was on the throne, a giant of a man, over 6'4", a warrior king who had brought stability to the realm. He had a wife, Elizabeth Woodville, and 2 healthy sons to inherit his crown. Everything looked stable. But what most people don't realize is how fragile that peace actually was. On April 9th, 1483, Edward IV suddenly passed away. He was just 40 years old. It wasn't a battlefield loss, it was likely pneumonia or a stroke brought on by excess. His passing created an instant power vacuum. The heir to the throne, Edward V, was just a 12-year-old boy. His brother Richard was only 9. In the medieval world, a child king was a disaster waiting to happen. A child couldn't lead an army, a child couldn't keep the barons in check. He needed a protector. Enter the story's antagonist, or protagonist, depending on who you ask. Richard, Duke of Gloucester. He was the late king's brother, a loyal soldier, and the man named Lord Protector in Edward's will. At first, it seemed like he was doing his duty. He intercepted the young king on his way to London, arrested his Woodville entourage, and brought the boy to the Tower of London.
Well, that is probably the darkest chapter in the Tower's long history, and it's still, of course, the subject of intense debate today.
Now, pause for a second. We hear Tower of London and think prison. But in 1483, it was a royal palace. Kings traditionally stayed there before their coronation. It wasn't necessarily a sinister move, yet. But then, Richard convinced the Queen to send the younger brother, 9-year-old Richard, to join Edward in the Tower to keep him company. The trap was set. Both heirs to the throne were now under one roof, under the complete control of their uncle. But here's the deal. Richard couldn't just seize the crown. He needed a reason. And this is where the pre-contract story comes in. On June 22, 1483, a preacher named Ralph Shaw stood up at St. Paul's Cross in London and dropped a bombshell. He claimed that the late King Edward IV had been secretly married to another woman, Lady Eleanor Butler, before he married Elizabeth Woodville. If this was true, his marriage to the Queen was bigamy, and if the marriage was fake, the children were illegitimate. It was a brilliant, ruthless legal maneuver. In one stroke, the princes were declared illegitimate. They lost their right to the throne. And who was next in line? Richard. 4 days later, he accepted the crown. But the problem remained. The boys were still alive. They were still in the tower. And as long as they breathed, they were a threat. Rebellions could be raised in their name. The illegitimacy claim could be overturned. For Richard to be safe, the boys had to disappear. And disappear they did. They were seen playing in the gardens less and less, until one day, the faces at the window were gone. The suspect list narrowed. With the boys gone, the finger-pointing began, but modern science has finally crossed some names off the suspect list. For 500 years, defenders of Richard III, the Ricardians, have argued that he was innocent. They claim he was a good king, smeared by Tudor propaganda. They point fingers at other suspects, but the new scientific evidence is like a wrecking ball to these theories. Let's look at the suspects the DNA and carbon dating have officially cleared. First, there's Henry VII. He's the man who defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field and started the Tudor dynasty. The theory was that Henry found the boys alive when he took the tower in 1485 and eliminated them to secure his own throne. It makes sense on paper. Henry had a weak claim, the princes were rivals, but the carbon dating destroys this theory. The boys passed away between 1483 and 1484. Henry VII was in exile in France at that time. He wasn't even in the country. He couldn't have done it. Then there's the Duke of Buckingham, Richard's right-hand man. He had a motive. He wanted to frame Richard or maybe take the throne himself. He rebelled against Richard in late 1483. Some historians argued he removed the boys before his rebellion. But the timeline is too tight. The carbon dating places the tragic end likely in the winter of 1483 to 1484, after Buckingham had already been executed for treason. It's technically possible, but highly unlikely. That leaves us with the man in charge, the man with the keys, the man who became king only after the boys were declared illegitimate, Richard III. The science puts the event exactly in the middle of his reign. The boys vanished under his watch, in his fortress, while he was king.
Rich III is the bad king.
The smoking gun isn't a weapon, it's a date. The precision of the radiocarbon test aligns perfectly with the time the boys stopped being seen. But what about the twist? The "it's not who you think" part. For centuries, people thought the bones might be fakes. They thought the princes escaped. There were rumors they were smuggled out to Europe. In the 1490s, a man named Perkin Warbeck, appeared, claiming to be Richard, the younger prince. He convinced huge chunks of Europe he was the real deal. He even invaded England. King Henry VII was terrified of him. But the DNA test on the Westminster urn crushes this theory into dust. Since the bones in the urn are the prince's, Perkin Warbeck was exactly what Henry said he was: a liar and an imposter. The boys never escaped. They never grew up. Their story ended in the dark, cold stone of the tower. The romantic idea of the lost prince returning is just that, a romance. The reality, confirmed by the double helix of mitochondrial DNA, is a tragedy. The final verdict. Now that the imposters are ruled out and the timeline confirmed, we are left with a single, undeniable conclusion about their fate. So, where does this leave us? The science has done what 500 years of historiography, debate, and romantic wishful thinking couldn't. It has provided certainty in a world addicted to speculation. For centuries, the silence of the historical record allowed our imaginations to run riot. We filled the void of the prince's disappearance with a cacophony of what-ifs and maybes, desperate to avoid the grim reality. We entertained the wild, the hopeful, and the conspiratorial. We gave credence to the changeling theory, the idea that the bodies in the urn were merely convenient substitutes, commoner children who had died of the plague, swapped by a sympathetic servant while the true heirs were smuggled across the channel to Flanders. We wanted to believe that the boys grew up in anonymity, perhaps as bricklayers in East Anglia or monks in a silent order, stripping themselves of their royal blood to keep their heads. We looked at figures like Perkin Warbeck, who emerged years later claiming to be Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York. For a time, he convinced the courts of Europe. He bore the mannerisms of a prince. He had the look of the Plantagenets. History wanted him to be real. We wanted the fairy tale restoration.
When they first arrived in the Tower of London, they were treated honourably. They were seen playing in the gardens, shooting arrows. But then by the autumn of 1483, those boys were never seen again.
Even more Machiavellian was the Tudor conspiracy, the theory that the boys actually survived Richard's reign entirely, only to be quietly dispatched by Henry VII after the Battle of Bosworth to sanitize his own shaky claim to the throne. It was a seductive narrative, turning the hero of the Wars of the Roses into the true villain, painting Richard as a misunderstood guardian who merely hid them for their own safety. There were even darker, more clinical theories. Some historians posited that there was no murder at all, that a virulent sweating sickness or a pre-existing condition took the eldest, Edward V, and the younger brother was whisked away to protect the remaining heir, only to die of grief or illness shortly after. In this version, the crime was merely a cover-up of natural negligence, a panic to hide a king dying on his uncle's watch. But the data eviscerates these stories. It shreds the romance. The DNA confirms the identity. The bones are, without a shadow of a genetic doubt, the children of Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV. The biological link is absolute. The carbon dating confirms the timeline with a precision that destroys the Tudor theory. They passed away in late 1483 or early 1484. They were dead long before Henry Tudor ever set foot on Bosworth Field. They never grew up to be bricklayers. They never fled to Europe. Perkin Warbeck was exactly what the king said he was, an imposter. The history confirms the opportunity. Richard III was the only one with the power to order it, the access to the tower to facilitate it, and the authority to cover it up. The sheer silence of the event speaks to a state-sanctioned erasure, not a chaotic accident or a servant's plot. It's not the happy ending people want. We want to believe in the escape. We want to believe in the mystery because the mystery allows us to suspend judgment. It allows us to view the past through a soft focus. But the science forces us to face the brutal truth of medieval politics without flinching. Kingship was a blood sport. Richard III wasn't necessarily the hunchbacked cartoon villain of Shakespearean drama, twisting his mustache in the shadows. But he was a man of his time, a time when securing the crown meant geometrically removing the competition. In the ruthless arithmetic of the 15th century, a living nephew was a rallying point for rebellion. A dead nephew was a tragedy, but a manageable one. The dark side of his ambition wasn't an anomaly, it was a biological imperative of dynastic survival. He chose the survival of his reign over the survival of his kin. So, Does this finally prove Richard III was a tyrant, or just a man doing what was necessary to survive? The science says he's guilty, but history is never black and white. What do you think? Did the DNA solve it, or is there still a piece of the puzzle missing? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more history mysteries solved by science, smash that like button and subscribe.